Now, I would not be surprised if the currency depreciate by something like 4 to 5%, and then maybe also next year another 4 to 5%. So over 2 years, that's a pretty big, Now, from a foreign investor point of view, if the stock market's up, 30, 20, 30%, then I feel okay, I can lose a little bit on the currency. But again, like on the topic of the investment grade upgrade, you want to have a very stable FX rate, among other things.
So I'm perhaps not as optimistic, but I'm actually quite optimistic for next year as well. I'm very certain, or highly confident, I should say, that the market will be higher in 12 months' time than it is today. I think that's a given, just by earnings growth alone. So yeah, I think it's a positive sort of outlook for the medium term.
Xin kính chào quý vị khán giả và nhà đầu tư đã quay trở lại với chương trình Data Talk Macro Insight. Tôi là Nguyễn Thị Triều, nhà sáng lập và giám đốc điều hành công ty cổ phần Bluebridge Việt Nam và là host của chương trình hôm nay với chủ đề Vị thế Việt Nam trong mắt nhà đầu tư nước ngoài và chính sách thu hút vốn. Data Talk Macro Insight là chuỗi tọa đàm chuyên sâu cập nhật những diễn biến quan trọng của kinh tế vĩ mô và thị trường tài chính trong nước và quốc tế, mang đến những góc nhìn sắc bén với dữ liệu khách quan và được dẫn dắt bởi những chuyên gia hàng đầu trong ngành. Trước khi bước vào phiên thảo luận, tôi xin trân trọng giới thiệu các diễn giả sẽ cùng đồng hành với tôi trong chương trình hôm nay. Ông Matthew Smith, giám đốc nghiên cứu và phân tích của khối khách hàng tổ chức chứng khoán Quanta Việt Nam. Hello, Mr. Smith. Yeah. Ông Michael Kokalari, giám đốc phòng phân tích kinh tế vĩ mô và nghiên cứu thị trường của Vina Capital. Welcome to famous guest to our show today. Yeah. Chúng ta vừa trải qua một tuần rất tích cực về thị trường chứng khoán Việt Nam. FC Russell đã chính thức nâng hạng thị trường chứng khoán Việt Nam từ thị trường cận biên lên mới nổi. Sự kiện này đã đánh dấu một bước ngoặt không những đối với thị trường chứng khoán Việt Nam mà còn định vị lại Việt Nam trên bản đồ đầu tư thế giới. Do vậy, ngày hôm nay chúng ta sẽ đến với các chủ đề thảo luận. Phần 1, vị thế của Việt Nam. Phần 2, thu hút vốn ngoại và cạnh tranh trong khu vực. Phần 3, tác động của chính sách đến thu hút dòng vốn đầu tư nước ngoài. Chúng ta sẽ đến với câu hỏi đối với hai diễn giả của chúng ta hôm nay. Mặc dù là với những cái diễn biến rất là tích cực về nền kinh tế vĩ mô thì trên thị trường chứng khoán chúng ta đã chứng kiến một cái xu hướng rút dòng của nhà đầu tư nước ngoài trong 3 năm gần đây và đặc biệt từ đầu năm 2025. Hiện nay thì tổng cái vốn đầu tư net outflow trên thị trường chứng khoán Việt Nam hiện nay đã đạt, trên biểu đồ mọi người có thể xem, đã đạt gần 4 tỷ đô lũy kế tính từ đầu năm. Và Việt Nam hiện nay là một trong các thị trường chứng khoán mà có cái lượng vốn rút dòng nhà đầu tư nước ngoài có thể nói là lớn nhất trong khu vực. Chúng ta cùng với Malaysia là một trong những thị trường chứng khoán mà có một cái xu hướng rất là nhất quán về việc rút dòng nhà đầu tư nước ngoài, mặc dù trong bối cảnh các nền kinh tế vĩ mô rất là tích cực. Do vậy là thưa Mr. Matthew, what factor in your opinion, what factor make Vietnam an attractive destination for foreign investors, especially now that Vietnam is no longer attracting FDI at any cost? We focus on science, technology, innovation, and digital transformation and green energy. So, in your opinion, what makes Vietnam attractive to foreign investors now?
I mean, I think directionally, the strategy of trying to encourage more value-add foreign direct investment in manufacturing in particular is a great one. And the attractiveness is very clear from the numbers, which you're seeing. Even this year, which has been a very disruptive year globally for trade because of the tariffs and all the issues coming out of Washington, we're still seeing FDI into Vietnam, quite strong, and moving toward, as I said, higher value-added industries is wonderful. And I think the main factors that are really going to draw FDI investors into Vietnam are related to the human resources component of Vietnam, because as you move up higher into in terms of the value chain of manufacturing, the cost of labor becomes less of an issue, and more the quality of what you get for the money that you pay becomes much more important. And Vietnam, of course, is providing that. I think that if you look at, for example, the education system, the results of that, PISA scores is the one that everybody cites. Vietnam's PISA scores for I think science and math are like the second highest in Asia, in ASEAN rather, after only Singapore, which of course is $70,000 GDP per capita country. So that's a very, very positive result. In my opinion, it's probably the key reason for FDI investment coming into Vietnam and continuing to do so. It also helps, I think, that Vietnam's government has very open trade relationships, many agreements with free trade agreements with other countries. That helps, and typically the authorities here are ready to offer other incentives, such as tax-related incentives to foreign direct investors for the right kind of investment. So I think all those three things matter, but the number one most important thing is probably the human resources capacity.
You know, in other words, all the things that have been driving FDI here for the last 10 years, they're still there. Hasn't changed. I think there was a lot of concern. We talked about this a lot before, that would the tariffs derail the FDI? And you see it hasn't had any impact. Basically, what we think is if the tariffs on Vietnam are, if the difference between the tariffs on Vietnam and other countries is like less than 10 percentage points, then we don't need to worry. And then you see it in the numbers. There's been no impact at all from all the Trump tariff stuff.
Oh. So, in your opinion, this Vietnam's advantage still sustained in the long term, especially when Vietnam income is not very low compared to the last period. Yeah. So the business growth in Vietnam is increasingly. So, do you think that this advantage still sustain in the future?
Yeah, the wages in Vietnam, the factory wages are still well below China, especially if you look at the coast on China. And as Matt said, the capability of the workers here is outstanding. So yeah, it's the same attraction that we've always had, I think.
Yeah, and in your opinion, tariff is not a matter anymore because
you can calculate it. I mean, you can see like what's our average tariff rate. And by the way, this is still all being negotiated. Supposedly the tariff for Vietnam is 20% right now. But if you go in and you calculate, this product has an exemption, this thing, that thing, it's actually lower than 20%. And I think that by next year, you'll see, quietly this whole tariff issue will start to go down. I wouldn't be surprised if a year from now, the actual tariffs that are being paid on Vietnam's exports to the US are like below 15%. But anyhow, for the FDI investment story, it's the difference between the tariff level that's important.
So it's very positive in the future. But regarding the FDI, it tells another story. So how do you think about the net outflow of foreign capital in the market?
It's his department.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's my question. So yeah, I think year to date, we've had about 4.2 billion USD in indirect investment outflows on a net basis. So that's obviously not good. And what is particularly perplexing, even to me, is that more than half of these outflows have occurred since August 1st. August, big net selling. September, big net selling. So that to me is not a necessary. Obviously, that's a negative. But I would sort of couch that within the context of what's happening with regional investment flows. In other words, we're seeing outflows from most of ASEAN markets, almost greater outflows in aggregate terms than we've seen from Vietnam, leaving Malaysia, leaving Indonesia, and Thailand. Those three markets in particular. Which is counterintuitive because emerging markets as a whole are seeing more inflows, but most of that is going to Northeast Asia. So if we look at China, Taiwan, and Korea, those three markets alone are about 2/3 of the entire global emerging markets index measured on MSCI standards. So those markets have all done extremely well. I think that investors are seeing better opportunities there. Better, lower valuations certainly in the case of China and Korea probably, but also probably more upside from some of the global thematics that are occurring, such as AI. I mean, we see SK Hynix today is up another 10%, right? This is one of the biggest semiconductor manufacturers for NVIDIA. They make the specialty memory chips. And they're doing very well because they're part of the whole AI ecosystem. We don't really have that here yet, at least not in terms of listed stocks. So yes, there's been a lot of outflows. It's in line with what we've seen in the region. Bear in mind, however, that because the market has risen by about 30% year to date, the actual ownership measured by dong or dollars of foreigners today, it's about 14% of the total market cap, which is $51 billion. If we go back a year, it was more like, I don't know, about 16% of total market cap, but the aggregate amount was only about 45 billion. So even though there's been a lot of selling, the value of the shares that foreigners own today is actually up by about 10%, a little bit more than 10% year to date. So that there's some measure, I think, of outflows from the region, but also people are taking profit. They made a lot of money here. And
it seems a little bit like, what you said, profit taking. It seems a little bit like foreign investors have a little bit used the actual FTSE upgrade, that plus a little. The currency is not that big of a deal, but a little. Those two things together, maybe that's we made big gains. This is the time to take some profits.
It's almost like a sell the
news, buy the rumors,
kind of trade. Yeah. It seems that way.
But the net outflow, I think that is very persistent for around 3 years. At the time that VN index is relatively low, they still net selling. So not only about valuation and the reason they take profit. So what challenge?
Good question. Hard question.
Thank you.
And I think the answer, and I'll let Matt talk about that. But I think the answer is that the motivation for the selling is different now than it was before.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of net selling in 2019, for example, after the previous bull market, which was actually primarily driven by foreign investment, right, in 2017 to 2018. I think a lot of those investors who were, major buyers of the IPOs that occurred in 2017 and especially 2018, that almost immediately had to mark down their investments, were very discouraged. So they were selling then. The last time foreigners were very strongly positive in terms of net buying was around about the crisis of the fourth quarter of 2022. So they basically were buying the lows, and now they're maybe selling the highs. I don't know what. I'm not suggesting that we're at the highs today, but I think to a certain extent there's profit taking happening here. Yeah.
To the last point you said, okay, not my area of expertise. I'm more of an economist, but I think the market's going to go up again next year a lot, actually. I mean, they're really stimulating the economy like crazy. I think we're going to have another very good year for the stock market next year.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same.
So despite the net selling, the stock market seems very positive because of very strong stimulus. Yeah.
Well, when you say despite net selling, I mean foreigners are,
account for a very
the
small
local
part.
retail investors are much more important than
so but our topic today is about foreign foreign investors. So how do you think Vietnam's valuation now in comparison with other stock market in the region? Yeah, you mentioned that they take profit from Vietnam to invest in China. So how do you think about the valuation of Vietnam stock market?
I mean, with the exception of a few very large cap stocks that have done incredibly well this year, we're still looking at pretty cheap at cheap stocks on a sort of a PE basis, for example. I think that going back 12 months, we could talk about deep value, particularly in the financials and particularly in the banks, and they've started to re-rate. So the PE multiples are not as low as they were. I think the market's PE is kind of in line with the historical average, but a lot of that's being driven by, as I said, there's one or two stocks that are trading at extremely high PE multiples, big market cap companies. So the banks, I think, are still reasonably cheap. I would say, I guess the argument would be it's gone from kind of deep value 12 months ago, an extreme deep value 2 years ago, to kind of value at a reasonable price, right? Or growth at a reasonable price. So the GARP model now comes back, and we can start talking about that for 2026, I think. Because I agree. I mean, I think that we're looking at reasonably low PE multiples, especially for the banks, and the earnings growth, I think, will continue. And we've got 18% for our
us too.
Yeah, us too.
We didn't talk before. By the way, the thing Matt just talked about, GARP, growth at a reasonable price. So one thing that a lot of foreigners like to look at is the PE ratio and then divided by the earnings growth.
Yeah.
And when it's below 1, which it is, that's also good.
So our PE is relatively high, but our growth is very potential. So PEG is reasonable.
PEG, yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, just one other thing to add to it. So another great question, but when we think about China specifically, this is a little bit of a different story. This is not different than Thailand and Malaysia. There's some very specific things that are going on in China. I mean, one of the things is that the foreign investors are very, very negative on China, overly negative. Actually, yesterday I joined a discussion with like pretty famous China economists. They're still very, very negative on it. But actually, if you look into the details, so like one of the things that's happened in China is they used to lend a lot to real estate. And now they're switching from lending to real estate to lend to industry. So they're exporting a lot of cars. Actually, not many people know this, but the Chinese government right now, so in Vietnam, we're going to stimulate the economy here. The amount of stimulus that they're doing in China is like 10% of GDP. It's huge. So the China story is we don't really look so much on a valuation base, a little bit of a different story. And by the way, one last thing on that topic, I don't think people are like selling Vietnam and moving the money to China, maybe in other markets, but I think what's happening is the money is going into China instead of coming here. That's part of what's going on.
Yeah, I see.
2026, Việt Nam đứng trước ngưỡng cửa tăng trưởng mới, nhưng đâu sẽ là động lực thật sự? Từ thay đổi pháp luật đất đai, chính sách tài chính, đến TOT, IFC và những thương vụ IPO lớn, tất cả sẽ được phân tích thẳng vào điểm nóng. Diễn đàn đầu tư Việt Nam, nơi nội dung số 1 dành cho nhà đầu tư không chỉ là tri thức mà còn kết nối thịnh vượng giữa lãnh đạo ngân hàng, quỹ, doanh nghiệp và nhà đầu tư. Động lực tăng trưởng nào cho 2026? Bất động sản trong kỷ nguyên mới sẽ ra sao? IPO, IFC và tài sản số liệu có mở ra chu kỳ mới? Câu trả lời sẽ có tại VF 2026, diễn ra vào ngày 4 tháng 11 năm 2025 tại The Reverie Sài Gòn, thành phố Hồ Chí Minh. VF 2026 nối tiếp thành công kiến tạo tầm nhìn cho một Việt Nam thịnh vượng. Hãy đồng hành cùng chúng tôi.
So after the upgrade, so what the context is different now? If the upgrade, how the significance of the upgrade to our stock market, the investor will allocate more capital in Vietnam, or that's rebalancing with the
Actually, so before I moved to Vietnam, which I love living here, I had worked in like JP Morgan, First Loss. So I always covered the big U.S. stock market, Japan stock market. To be honest, I never even heard of the FTSE index before I moved here. And everybody knows the MSCI. So the MSCI will be the one that really makes a difference. By the way, there's another upgrade that we don't hear anyone talking about, which is really important, is that when a country wants to borrow money in the international capital markets, the foreign investors really care about your credit rating. So right now, Vietnam has a BB plus credit rating. It's almost what we call investment grade, but not quite. This is a big deal. The government really needs to focus on, because we have all these big projects that we want to do, infrastructure spending. We need to get the money from somewhere. Part of the money will come from here, but part we will have to borrow from the foreigners. So I think for me, like focusing on upgrading to get the investment grade credit rating for Vietnam, you'll hear people talk about that more next year.
It will lower our borrowing costs.
Lower borrowing costs, but not just lower borrowing costs, but enable a lot more borrowing. Yeah. And what we've seen in the past, like with Indonesia, Philippines and stuff, that in and of itself also brings a lot of money to the stock market because people feel, okay, now they got the stamp, stamp of approval.
So many things need to be done to meet the criterion. And which in your opinion?
Great question. If you look at, and this is a little bit similar to the stock market upgrade story, there's the quantitative and the qualitative. So quantitative, if you look at like the ratio, debt to GDP, blah, blah, everything is kind of okay. Nothing's too, some things need to be a little bit better, but not like way off. But the qualitative, which is similar to the whole stock market story, how does the capital markets function here? How does the policy interest rate work? These are the main things, similar, not different story than the stock market, but it's similar in the sense that it's these qualitative things that need reforms that need to be addressed.
So it means the business environment and
not so much the business environment, more like for example, how does the SBV set policy rates? We basically have like 3 different policy rates, and the IMF and others have in the past recommended, why doesn't Vietnam kind of copy the system that they use in the US and just set like a target range for the interbank market? Like this year, if you look at the interbank market, it's been 0 sometime, it's been like 8%. I mean, it's really go up and down. So if they were to, for example, like they do in the US, target to make a stable interbank market, make that the policy rate, that would be the type of thing that would help us to get an investment grade credit rating.
So I see. So in terms of you are master in macroeconomics,
I don't know master.
So,
he's master in the stock market.
What's the biggest challenge for Vietnam macroeconomics? People mention FX volatility. Vietnam Dong.
So we applaud all the things that the government is doing to stimulate the economy and the reforms and all this kind of stuff. They're talking about 20% credit growth right now. Like 20% credit growth to get 8% GDP growth, that's not, that ratio doesn't really work. And so with things like that, when you really step on the gas pedal, like really step on the gas pedal, the escape valve is often, depend on the countries, different countries work different, but very often when you see in the past different countries that like really stimulate the economy hard, sometimes the FX, the foreign exchange will be the release valve. So this year, what we saw earlier in the year is that they really seem to be, we don't have any kind of information, it's special information, but we observed what the SBV was doing. It looked like they want to stop at the 3% year to date. Don't let the currency depreciate by more than 3%. And now we see like they talk about some measures that are softer, not a strong measure. We understand why they, I understand why they do that. But now I would not be surprised if the currency depreciate by something like 4 to 5%, and then maybe also next year another 4 to 5%. So over 2 years, that's a pretty big, Now from foreign investor point of view, if the stock market's up, 30, 20, 30%, then I feel okay, I can lose a little bit on the currency. But again, like on the topic of the investment grade upgrade, you want to have a very stable FX rate, among other things. So for me, this is the only macro issue I see in Vietnam right now.
What's interesting, actually, I take this as a positive. I put a positive spin on it, which is that if you can stop that, if you can retain the capital within the Vietnam financial system, then it creates a lot more liquidity for the domestic stock market for sure, but also just for the economy in general. And that's exactly what's happened.
The money's still here, basically, still in the country.
Exactly. So it goes into a safe, or it goes into your currency app. If you're able to keep it here and keep it within the formal financial system, and what's really interesting, and I think positive, although it's preliminary numbers, like I said, last year the total outflows were 32 billion USD. In the first 2 quarters of this year, it's only about 2.5, 3 billion. So that number has declined substantially, which I think is one of the reasons why, despite the foreign selling in the stock market, you're still seeing the share prices go up. So the money is actually staying in the financial system here, which I think is a very positive thing.
The discussions that the government is having about like digital assets here, they're still trying to decide what to do, but to the extent that they can make local cryptocurrencies that people can, keep the money here in Vietnam. To Matt's point, if the money that's outside the formal gold and US dollar cash, this kind of stuff, it's huge. It's probably like over 25% of GDP of the money that's just here, but not in the formal financial system. And then you would see the stock market go up a lot.
So in your view, the currency depreciation is still a concern next year, because you estimate
Not
about
related to that.
5% depreciation.
So we're coming at the story from a slightly different point of view. I'm saying that the history of countries that really aggressively stimulate their economy, and that when there's a big mismatch between the credit growth and what's the productivity, so that's one source of depreciation on the currency. Matt's bringing up another source of depreciation on the currency. By the way, there's a third thing we can talk about as well, which is that I'm actually quite optimistic about the value of the US dollar next year. So, we're both American, we have a different view on things, but some of the steps that Trump has taken to also stimulate the economy, they want to make it so much easier to build factories, try to bring investment into the US. I think, and this is not the consensus view, most people expect the dollar to go down next year. Usually when most people think one thing's going to happen in the stock market, the opposite happens. So I think another source of depreciation pressure on the Vietnam dong next year will be, I would expect the value of the dollar to go up by, not huge, but maybe 4 or 5% next year. That'll be another thing that's weighing on the dong.
Yeah, somebody says that 5% is still reasonable.
Yeah,
because
reasonable,
because Vietnam aims at a very ambitious target of GDP growth next year, around double digits. So how do you think about that target? Is it realistic or?
I'll ask the professional economist here for that one.
Well, they have a lot of good ideas, and if all the reforms that the government is talking about, Resolution 68 and some of the other things, if they manage to do all of those things, we think that the long-term, Vietnam's long-term GDP growth, the potential will be at least 1%, maybe even 2% higher if all the reforms take time to come together. So yeah, that's my answer.
How about you?
I mean, it's
you
great
say
to have,
what he said.
Yeah, I agree with everything Mike said. It's great to have ambitions. It's certainly aggressive, and I think the policy changes that are occurring. There are questions about credit growth. I admit that, but as far as like the more qualitative policy changes that are occurring are the right direction. So directionally, I think it's great.
10% is a big number. And we're not a small economy anymore.
So the credit growth, you mentioned credit growth and public investment is a key driver of this year growth. So for the next years, what is the key driver?
Wow, you have many good questions, by the way. Okay, so if we look at this year, what's going on is that the exports to the US have been much more resilient than even than we expected. So we thought once the Trump tariffs come in place, the exports to the US are going to drop. And that hasn't happened. Why? Because of something that Matt and also your question before, that there's more and more high-tech investment that's coming here. Apple is moving a lot of the production of its MacBook and some other stuff here in Vietnam. Tim Cook talked about this in Apple's earnings calls. So the export of this kind of thing, computers, electronics, this type of stuff, to the export of these kind of high-tech products this year in Vietnam is up almost 50%. This is an incredible number because, again, it's not from a small base, it's a big base. So what we're seeing so far is that the exports to the US are very strong, okay? Also, you have a lot of tourism coming in. What's not really working well here is the domestic consumption. So if you look at the real retail sales, it's growing at around 7% or so. But if you strip out the tourists, then the revenue is growing around 5% or so. And the companies that a lot of us invest in, we also notice the revenue is kind of sideways, not weak, not strong, right? So that's this year. So what happens next year? Well, the first thing is I think it's, again, very clear that the exports are not going to collapse. There's some index we look at, like new export orders and some other things, and all that stuff has kind of recovered now. So I think that next year, Vietnam's exports, maybe like 8-9% growth, something like that. So in other words, it goes from a high to kind of normal level. And then on the other hand, the consumption is kind of low right now. And I think this will come up to a normal level with all the reforms in the stock market. People should start to feel better about spending. Also, people after COVID, people depleted their savings rates during COVID. And so they've been saving extra. But if you look at how many years they've been saving extra for, probably their savings have not completely recovered, but enough that they should start to feel comfortable spending. So that's two things for next year. Exports kind of come down to a normal level. Consumption kind of goes up to a normal level. But the other thing is that the amount of infrastructure disbursement is huge. I mean, it's the numbers really, they've done a great job of dispersing a lot, but it happens so quickly that it takes time for the money to actually go into the economy. So if you look at like right now in the first 9 months of the year, the infrastructure spending is up like more than 40%, but construction is only up around 8 or only grew about 8%. Well, that gap means that's a delay that will feed into the economy next year. So those will be the three things that are happening. You'll have the export kind of normalize, consumption sort of normalize. Tourism, it will be hard to repeat what we had this year. And then the delayed effect of all the infrastructure spending that was dispersed already, but not actually spent yet.
Yeah, so many detailed information. Thank you.
Yeah, I think next year is going to be a really good year for the economy, and that will feed through to the stock market as well.
I think that our topic cover many. Our discussion cover many topic about the macroeconomic and
That's
stock
because
market.
you're a great interviewer.
Thank you so much. Now maybe for the final takeaway question, what is our message for local investor regarding the macroeconomic outlook and the foreign capital that we mentioned in the discussion?
So next year is going to be a very strong year for the economy. I think that will also boost the stock market. We didn't really talk about AI, artificial intelligence. We didn't have, so many topics, but this is also something I'm very positive about, and I have a little bit of knowledge about this area, and I'm very optimistic about this also. This is less of a story for next year, but kind of the long-term story. So yeah, I think things still look very, very good here.
Yeah, despite the stock market has rise significantly from the beginning of the year, so the long-term potential for stock market is still very positive.
Yeah, and the valuation is, as Matt said, is kind of in
matter
line
of time.
with, it's not like stretched, it's not high.
So, but we should be patient because it rise considerably. From this valuation, the P is relatively high.
Okay, normally you should be patient, but I think next year is going to be another quick year. That's my opinion.
Thank you so much. So how about Matthew?
Yeah, I might not be as short-term bullish, but I do think that I agree that next year the macro conditions look great. Liquidity conditions, which matter a lot for financial markets, also should remain quite conducive to share price gains. But I think that's something that obviously it's moving in the right direction, and it's hard to say exactly what foreign flows are going to be next year, because I would not have guessed what's occurred year to date it would occur. That's a surprise to me. But I think that again in a longer term that as the market continues to grow, as more and more stocks that are available for foreign ownership open up and more IPOs occur, which is now happening again, I think that's eventually that has to the foreign investment community will respond positively from that. So I'm perhaps not as optimistic, but I'm actually quite optimistic for next year as well. I'm very certain or highly confident, I should say, that the market will be higher in 12 months' time than it is today. I think that's a given just by earnings growth alone. So yeah, I think it's a positive sort of outlook for the medium term.
Yeah, thank you. In more specific, Vina Capital is one of the best performing fund in Vietnam. Yeah, so can you suggest which industry will the most benefit in the market in the next year? You mentioned banking, very reasonable price. So
I didn't mention banking, he mentioned
sorry. You mentioned banking. Okay.
We look the same.
Yeah, when we're still overweight the banks, I think to me that there's a lot of things going on in the domestic side of the economy, which by the way is very well represented on the stock market, unlike the manufacturing. Domestic side of the economy looks positive. The property market's finally being unlocked, and I'm not just talking about the pricing, which I think there's issues there, but the ability of developers to proceed with their projects now is starting to open up, and this is wonderful. This is a big change from the previous 4 or 5 years. That you can play that by buying property developers directly, but I think that it's much easier for me to talk to institutional investors about the banking system, because the banks, as I believe, are undervalued even today, and the reason for that undervaluation is concerns about the property market, which pretty much is the backstop for all the collateral that the banks use. So if you believe the bank's balance sheets, then for sure they're undervalued today relative to their profitability. And as the belief in the bank's balance sheets starts to improve, along with sentiment for the property market, I think that those stocks should re-rate. So that to me is the obvious play. I like the banks, and I also think the consumer names, in line with what you're saying, should do well next year. I mean, we've been sort of long-term overweight consumer discretionary, underweight consumer staples, and maybe we need to bring that back into balance, because there might be a better story for the staples companies next year.
Like I don't think consumption is going to boom next year, but it's like when you push the ball underwater, and okay, we'll come back to kind of a more normal level. Totally agree with you on the real estate. One interesting thing when I talk to Vietnamese investors as well is some of them are a little bit skeptical about the real estate market, and from here they say, oh well, the price already went up. Actually, this is not really like a price story. I don't see prices going up much more, but the volume. And that's where the earnings comes from for the developers, So,
Perfect, thank you. So you share the same view with him about banking. Yeah, with a huge credit growth, and a very reasonable valuation. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. Kính thưa các quý vị khán giả, chúng ta đã vừa trải qua một cuộc thảo luận rất là chi tiết và với nhiều thông tin hữu ích từ hai vị diễn giả của chúng ta, cover các chủ đề từ kinh tế vĩ mô, sức hấp dẫn của kinh tế Việt Nam trong bản đồ đầu tư thế giới, cũng như là các dự báo về diễn biến của thị trường chứng khoán Việt Nam trong bối cảnh trung hạn sắp tới. Từ các thảo luận của các vị diễn giả, chúng ta có thể thấy một cái đánh giá và một cái nhận định rất là lạc quan và tươi sáng về nền kinh tế vĩ mô Việt Nam cũng như thị trường chứng khoán Việt Nam, mặc dù có những cái trợ lực hạn chế nhất định trong ngắn hạn, giống như là chúng ta đã nhắc đến về cái sự biến động của đồng Việt Nam cũng như sự giảm giá của đồng Việt Nam trong giai đoạn vừa rồi và cái xu hướng bán dòng của nhà đầu tư nước ngoài. Tuy nhiên về trung hạn thì với những cái lợi thế cạnh tranh của Việt Nam trên thu hút vốn FDI cũng như cái khả năng tiềm năng tăng trưởng của kinh tế Việt Nam, thì hy vọng là kinh tế Việt Nam cũng như thị trường chứng khoán Việt Nam sẽ bước vào một giai đoạn kỷ nguyên tăng trưởng mới, xứng đáng với cái vị trí là thị trường chứng khoán từ thị trường cận biên sang thị trường mới nổi mà chúng ta vừa mới được ghi nhận. Xin cảm ơn quý vị khán giả đã đến với chương trình Việt Nam Data Talk về chủ đề thị trường tài chính Việt Nam trong con mắt nhà đầu tư nước ngoài hôm nay. Thank you so much for joining us and for very valuable idea. Yeah, thank you so much. Xin cảm ơn quý vị khán giả và rất là mong chờ quý vị sẽ trở lại với Data Talk vào số lần tới. Xin cảm ơn.
2026, Việt Nam đứng trước ngưỡng cửa tăng trưởng mới, nhưng đâu sẽ là động lực thật sự? Từ thay đổi pháp luật đất đai, chính sách tài chính, đến TOT, IFC và những thương vụ IPO lớn, tất cả sẽ được phân tích thẳng vào điểm nóng. Diễn đàn đầu tư Việt Nam, nơi nội dung số 1 dành cho nhà đầu tư không chỉ là tri thức mà còn kết nối thịnh vượng giữa lãnh đạo ngân hàng, quỹ, doanh nghiệp và nhà đầu tư. Động lực tăng trưởng nào cho 2026? Bất động sản trong kỷ nguyên mới sẽ ra sao? IPO, IFC và tài sản số liệu có mở ra chu kỳ mới? Câu trả lời sẽ có tại VF 2026, diễn ra vào ngày 4 tháng 11 năm 2025 tại The Reverie Sài Gòn, thành phố Hồ Chí Minh. VF 2026 nối tiếp thành công kiến tạo tầm nhìn cho một Việt Nam thịnh vượng. Hãy đồng hành cùng chúng tôi.